Dr. Hall, thank you. Here we are again, 2 years in, nothing's changed. But I want to correct the record about a couple of things, Mr. Chairman. You know, we hear these superficial conversations about growth. You know, there are two ways, Dr. Hall, to grow GDP, right? You can grow your population, or you can grow your productivity. That's right. It.
Yes.
So, of course, if you say, okay, in a world of flat innovation and flat technology growth or whatever, okay, we can grow our population. So the answer is, of course, more immigration. Well, we're immigrating more people now, twice, a little more than 2.5 times, frankly, than our 100-year average. And yet, in the last 8 years, with this economy has grown on a per capita compound basis 0.61% in the last 8 years. It's the weakest recovery in history. That's the lowest economic growth of any president in U.S. history. My concern, Mr. Chairman, is that we're not talking about the real issues. And I applaud you for having this hearing, and I applaud the CBO for what you're doing to remind us again what you reminded us of last year, that this is not sustainable. And we know that the two 800-pound gorillas in the room are Social Security and Medicare. And I want to set the record straight, Mr. Chairman and Dr. Hall. I, for one, have never called for cutting Social Security. You do not have to cut Social Security benefit for people on Social Security to solve this. But every year that goes by, the solution gets harder and more difficult and more painful for people 50, 100 years from now. To oversimplify this, I want to get at a couple of things. Dr. Hall, if we were to, in Social Security, there are only a few levers. Some people say 4, some people say 5, but basically you can change the age, you can look at means testing, you can look at the inflator that's embedded in there that's incorrect, and you can also talk about the revenue formula. Beyond that, if we were to, for example, on the debt that we have, and I like to look at the public debt because I happen to think that the debt that we owe Social Security and Medicare trust funds is real debt, and that we'll eventually have to pay the piper there. And you talk about the interest rate going up. I think in here, I think the assumption is it would be at the higher level, about 2.5 or 3% during the life of this.
That's right.
And so what would happen, Dr. Hall, if interest rates were to go to their 30-year average of about 5.5% on the full, both public debt and the debt owed to mainly Social Security trust fund?
Well, higher interest rates would have a really significant effect on our forecast and would actually pretty significantly raise our estimate of the budget deficit. Because we have such a large and growing debt, raising that interest rate has a really big impact on the net interest payments.
So the last few years, we've seen the annual deficit, not the debt, the annual deficit decline, I would actually say fairly significantly. But the budget that we're operating under right now, under the past 3 or 4 years, that performance projected out over the next 10 years, as I look at this, we move right back to $1 trillion annual deficits within a very short period of time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that the total here is, I haven't totaled it up, somewhere we're going to add, if we don't do anything from our baseline budget, which is what we're talking about in CBO, we'll add another $9.5 to $10 trillion to the current $20 trillion of total debt. Is that fair?
Yes. So
when I look at the solution, can we grow our way out of this? If that's all we did, hold everything else constant, and all we did was grow the economy, can we solve that $30 trillion problem?
I think the short answer is no.
No. Secondly, if we were to tax the top 3% of our earners in this country, the ones demonized by by certain members of the other side of the aisle, if we were to take the entire income of those people over the next 20, 30 years, would that solve the debt crisis?
I'd have to look at that, but I
we've run the numbers. Directionally, I'm correct. It would not.
No.
So a single-faceted attempt to solve Social Security and to solve the debt crisis is really very naive, in my opinion, as a business guy. And when I look at this, we've got several areas of opportunity. One thing I think we all agree is there are opportunities. Well, let's get at talking about the opportunities. The budget process is broken. We know that. I'm not going to have time to lay out all the problems with that. But I will say this, in the last 42 years since the 74 budget, and by the way, it took that commission 7 years to write the Budget Act, and that Budget Act has only worked 4 times in 42 years, and over those 42 years, we've only appropriated, I want everybody to listen to this, we've only appropriated an average of 2.5 appropriation bills per year. This is a fraud on the American people. It's been perpetrated for 42 years, and it's time we deal with it. That's just one area that we can use to help arrest this runaway government spending. $2.4 trillion is what we spent in 2000. We spent $3.8 trillion last year, and that's constant dollars. We've got to look at redundant spending. We've got to grow the economy. I think we've got to save Social Security and Medicare over the long term, and that makes it viable for our kids and grandkids. And lastly, we've got to get at the spiraling driver for health care cost inflation. I'm running out of time, Mr. Chairman, but I'll hold the other questions for a second round. Thank you.